Hi, I'm Tim Berglund with Confluent. Not everybody running Apache Kafka has traffic that spikes from megabytes per second to gigabytes per second in the space of an hour. But imagine if you did. That would not be an easy cluster to administer. I'm actually going to do that in Confluent Cloud using the self-service provisioning interface of a dedicated cluster. In order to get access to this kind of cluster, you have to buy a thing called a commitment. And mind you, with a commit, as in anywhere in Confluent Cloud, you still only pay for what you use, the data you store and read and write. Now, to save us some time, I've done a little bit of work in advance. I've already created a dedicated cluster and loaded it with a little bit of traffic. Now, when you create a dedicated cluster, you pick a cluster size in a special unit called a CKU. A CKU doesn't correspond necessarily to a certain number of brokers, but rather to a certain amount of data transfer in and out, a certain amount of storage, and some other units of capacity like that. Right now, I've got a 2 CKU cluster, and I'm loading it with the maximum rated traffic for 2 CKUs, which is 100 megabytes per second inbound, or actually 107, but who's counting? Now, you can see we're reading about 3x the amount of traffic that we're writing, so that's a little over 300 megabytes per second of read traffic. The UI is even helpfully alerting us that we're at our maximum rated capacity for the cluster. But hey, 100 megabytes per second inbound is pretty pedestrian. We can do better. Using the Selfserve expansion UI, I'm going to ask to grow 25x to 50 CKUs. Now, at the time of this recording, if you're trying this at home, you might see a smaller maximum CKU limit in your cluster. I'm using a version of the user interface that will let me scale to 50, so don't panic if you see a different number in cloud yourself. This is all still 100% real Confluent Cloud that we're using. But still, from 2 to 50 CKUs, don't let those words pass you by too quickly. To expand a cluster like this by hand would require a lot of work, or at very least, significant automated tooling to spin up the instances, install and configure Kafka on them, and all of that. And even if you did that, remember the old cluster had been taking traffic for a while. If you remember, there was more than 100 gigabytes of data in it. That's data stored on brokers. Once you expand the cluster and add 25 times as many brokers, you'll need to rebalance that data all around the new cluster, around the new brokers. Kafka doesn't do that by itself, but Confluent Cloud does. The Confluent Cloud Kubernetes robots are right now busy provisioning brokers, and those brokers are rebalancing the data we've written to them so far. This is a huge process under the hood, and it takes time, even though the Confluent Cloud UI made it look easy. For this demo, of course, I've sped that time up. Now that it's done, we can see our new cluster with all 50 CKUs ready to go. Oh, and of course, I never shut down that 100 megabytes per second of load. But that load is now laughably small for this new mega cluster, so I'm going to increase it a little bit. Well, okay, not a little bit. I'm going to turn on about 2.7 gigabytes per second of write traffic and about 8 gigabytes per second of read. That's nearly 11 gigabytes per second in total. And we'll watch that happen here in the cluster overview graphs. There it is. That's a 25x increase in cluster throughput. Let's just let that run. You might notice the storage on the bottom there is also taking off, which stands to reason with all this data coming in. Now, in this demo, I showed you the not inconsiderable scalability you can get with Confluent Cloud's dedicated clusters, but we also have 2 other types you can use, standard and basic. They both scale elastically from 0 to 100 megabytes per second, which remember is where this demo started out. But standard clusters offer multi-AZ availability and a defined SLA, while basic clusters give you the advantage of costing less to operate. And we find many people actually like using a mix of cluster types to keep costs low across different kinds of workloads and stages of development and testing and pre-production and production and so forth. And also, as is typically the case, if you sign a commitment, you can get bigger discounts based on your usage. But hey, before you even get to that point, you could start for free. We're offering free credits each month for the first 3 months. So sign up and start building something.